Hello from my side. Good morning. It's my pleasure to give you a basic introduction on the topic of insects. I think those basics are very important to have a good foundation for everything that comes later from the other speakers. So my first question is, you can think for yourself, how many insect species do you know? So actually, can we go to the next slide? Then will I tell you to go to the next slide, or how does it work?
No, I flipped it already. Don't you see?
Yes.
Fabiola?
So I just tell you when to go to the next slide. All right, thank you. So as you can see here, their insects are actually very diverse. So the current numbers suggest that there are more than 1 million species of insects, which means there are more species of insects than there are species of plants, other animals, bacteria, algae, and so on together. So can you imagine that? And with this information, we kind of get an idea that insects are very diverse and yeah, there's not the insect. So I think currently in media it's always insect protein, but actually it's a very diverse group, and we will have a closer look on that now. Next slide, please. So first of all, insects are very adaptive. They can be found in basically every habitat on our planet Earth. So maybe forest, grassland, there's fresh water as well as salt water, and even in freezing temperatures, they can survive. Please. And one slide back, please.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. So they can even be found in very extreme habitats like manure. And you can imagine manure being highly occupied by pathogens. So insects really adapted to every possible niche you can find. Thank you. Next slide, please. And this brings me to another common misunderstanding about insects. So if you follow the recent press, you get the impression that you can throw basically any organic matter onto those insects, which we already learned it's not like one insect, but they're very diverse and they will eat it. And that's for sure not the case. So first, it's very important to understand that insects are very specialized and they have, for example, different mouthpieces. So there are chewing mouthpieces, there are piercing sucking mouthpieces, siphoning mouthpieces, and sponging mouthpieces. And you might already have an idea which belongs to which well-known insect species. And Bernd, maybe you click a couple of times since there are some pictures coming. Thank you very much. So as diverse as the mouthpieces, I think there are even some more pictures. That's it. Thank you. So as diverse as the mouthpieces are, as diverse is the nutrition of different insect species. So there are insects which basically feed on a great variety of possible feed substrates, like the famous black soldier fly, and this makes them very suitable for insect rearing. However, there are also insects that are highly specialized, and that's, for example, the PROMBYX silkworm, which only feeds on mulberry tree leaves. So only one plant part of one specific plant. And in between that, you can see on this picture all kinds of feed sources and habits. So we have insects feeding on wood, insects feeding on blood, insects feeding on flowers, everything you can imagine, even like the marine beetles feeding on dead animals. And it's not even only one way. So the insects are not only eating, but they are also ejecting substances into their feed to pre-digest it outside of their body. So it's really very interesting what's going on there. And I think it's very important when you want to rear a specific species of insect to look into the feeding habit of this insect. Thank you. We can go to the next slide. So what are insects? So one main characteristic is they have 3 pairs of legs. Can you please click 3 times? So 1, 2, 3. And I think that's the easiest feature to count the legs, and then it gives you a strong hint whether it's an insect or not. One more click, please. So basically, you can see here, these little fellows do not have 3 legs. The spider has 4 pairs of legs, so it's not an insect. And then centipede obviously also has much more legs, so also does not count to the insect. Next slide, please. Yeah, additionally, insects do not have a skeleton as we have, but they have a chitinous exoskeleton. So basically, their firm skin gives them their structure. Next click, please. Thank you. And yeah, not everything that is small and on the ground is an insect, obviously. So the exoskeleton is not true for the snake. So this is obviously also not an insect. Thank you. What is very distinctive about insects, they have 3 main body parts. 2 more clicks, please. It's the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. And they can be found in every insect. And yeah, again, you cannot find this distinctive body parts in an earthworm, so obviously not an insect. Yeah, insects also have antennae. And we go to the next slide, please. And usually they have 2 pairs of wings, or in some cases 1 pair of wings and 1 pair of halteres, which are like used to be wings. Thank you. Now you might think, okay, we got all these characteristics, but how do they apply to the insects we know? So where does the silkworm have wings? Where does the black soldier fly larvae have like legs or antennae? Where does this apply to the mealworm? Well, if we look in their adult stage, there we are. There you find all those features, and also compound eyes, which are another characteristic of insects. And this topic brings us to the next slide, which is the metamorphosis of insects. And the 2 main forms of metamorphosis we find in insects is hemimetabolism and holometabolism, which applies to the insects that are commonly reared. In hemimetabolism, which is like a grasshopper and cricket, they fall into this group. A tiny nymph hatches from the egg, and this tiny nymph is much smaller than the adult, but basically looks very alike. And they molt several times and grow. And with their final molt, they get into adult stage where they have wings and they are fertile and can reproduce. But they basically look like the same version, just in different size. That's very different with holometabolism and holometabolous insects. They change their appearance drastically throughout their life. There are different examples of that, like beetles, flies, and in this case, a silkworm. And you're probably most aware of the changes within the butterfly or moth fly. So they hatch as a teeny tiny silkworm, or it's the larval form. Actually, worm is not very specific since worms are not insects, but in this case, they are called silkworms. And they also mold and grow. And once they are on their full size, they pupate. In this case, they build a cocoon and the pupa is inside. And eventually the moth will hatch and lay. This can lay eggs again, and then the circle starts again. Next slide, please. Thank you. A short look on insect pathologies. So this is a really big field, and basically every pathogen that we know from human pathology or pathogen group can also affect insects. And there are sometimes very specified and specialized pathogens that only infect one certain kind of, one certain species of insect or a group of insects, but not all of them. And others are very common and can affect almost all insects. It's important to know that insects do have an immune system, obviously, but maybe we do not always think about it. So they have mechanisms to defend themselves. However, there are viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites, and even other groups that can affect the health of insects. And we are still quite at the beginning to diagnose and treat insect diseases. And of course, this is an issue for mass rearing, where we have huge amounts of insects from the same species in one place. So actually in Europe, the animal doctors are who treat usually the pigs and cows and chickens are also responsible to treat insects. But as you can imagine, they are not trained well to do that. So I think one of the main measurements insect viewers rely on is hygiene, good hygiene in their facilities, and to try to avoid bringing pathogens from outside into their rearing facilities. But I'm sure this topic will come up more often during this webinar series. Next slide, please. Yeah, what can we get from insects by rearing them? So I think the main product we are all familiar with is protein, also lipids, then the frass. The manure from the insects can also be used and become very valuable as a fertilizer. Also, the chitin can be a very interesting product, and what's still quite new but could also play an important role in the future are antimicrobial peptides. Next step, please. Yeah, last but not least, I will give you a short introduction what I do with my company PROMBYX. So we work with silkworms, as already mentioned, and we utilize byproducts of the silk industry. So at the point where you have the cocoon and the pupa inside, the cocoon is used for silk production, and we use the pupa inside to process it to ingredients for animal feed stuff, and thereby utilize this byproduct. Yeah, this is what the silkworm pupae look like in a dry form. And for example, we process them into protein powder. We mechanically defast them, and then we get a protein powder with 80% crude protein and 5% fat, which is a great ingredient for example, pet food. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's it from my side. If you have further questions or want to contact me, please don't hesitate to write me an email or find me on LinkedIn.